Okay, well, if my last video was all about problems, then this video is about solutions. It's about small steps you can take to make it easier to declutter your things based on sort of what's blocking you, what's keeping you from decluttering at this point in your life. Now, note that I said easier and not easy, because this doesn't mean that decluttering will be easy, but there are ways that you can make it a little less hard on yourself and hopefully get over that hump and do the decluttering that you want to do. So if you saw my previous video, you can expect a similar format, but I'm not going to be re-explaining what the problems are or the things that are keeping us from decluttering. So I will link to that video in the cards if you want to watch it. But this video, we are really just going to focus on what you can do about it, okay? So let's get started. So if security is one of the things that is keeping you from decluttering, you might find this exercise helpful. And my husband and I actually do this all the time together when we're struggling to know whether or not to get rid of something that, we're kind of holding on to because it feels safer. And the first question that we ask ourselves is, how likely is it that I will ever need this thing again in the future? So for example, right after we got married, I had 2 sets of floor mats for my car. One was an all-weather one, and one was the set that came with my car. And the reason that I was keeping both of them was that the original set fit my car perfectly, right? And so I was like, well, if anything ever happens to all-weather ones, I can always sub these in and they'll fit. And my husband said, okay, but how likely are you to need these? Because the all-weather mats are really sturdy, really durable. That's why you got them in the first place, right? So the answer there was unlikely. But what's the percentage, right? Sometimes it's hard to go okay, what is likely, what is unlikely? So sometimes a more helpful way to phrase that question is, what's the statistical likelihood that I will need this thing again? So for example, with the floor mats, I would have said there's maybe a 2% chance that I will need these floor mats again in the future. And 2% is really not a high enough number for me to hold on to it, because it's not going to be devastating if I have to go out and buy some floor mats that don't fit my car perfectly, right? Which leads me to the second question, which is, how likely am I to be able to find an acceptable substitute for this thing that I'm holding on to in the future? So maybe it's not the best case scenario, but it's an acceptable substitute, right? And if the answer is that you're probably going to be able to find an acceptable substitute for that thing in the future, then get it out. But if the answer is that you may not be able to find it, then those are, I think, the exceptions to the rule, where it's okay, yeah, you may need it and you're unlikely to be able to find a substitute. So it's okay to just hold on to that thing until you know for sure that you aren't going to need it, right? The second thing I'd recommend is specifically for those of us who tend to hold on to records of things, particularly paper records. So if you hold on to receipts or bills or things like that, see what you can digitize. You can get your phone out, you can take a picture of it, you can scan it, see what you can put online. Use Google Drive or Dropbox or something like that. And here's why. First of all, those papers are taking up a lot of space in your physical space. And so that's going to take up a much bigger mental load than if it were online somewhere where you could access them. And second of all, when you do need to find something in those records, it's going to be a lot easier to actually find it if it's online somewhere where you can search it, right? So digitize whatever you can. And obviously there are things that you have to hold on to, but you don't probably have to hold on to everything. Another thing that I find really helps me combat my struggles with security is setting a time limit to how far out I can hold on to things. So for me, the time limit that I tend to set is a year. If I don't see myself using something within the next year, it's probably out, except for, the things in the exercise that we did at the beginning where it's oh, I will probably need this in 5 years and I won't be able to find a substitute. But I actually can't think of anything like that off the top of my head. Most things there are substitutes or you just won't need them in 5 years. And so I think a year out is a very reasonable amount of time, especially because if you go any longer than a year, you probably won't be able to remember where you put that thing. And it may or may not still be good depending on what it is. And then finally, I would just say if security is one of your struggles for decluttering, I would start a little savings account or envelope or however you do your budgeting, and just start putting a little bit of money aside every single paycheck for unexpected expenses. We do this as part of our budgeting program just because it was recommended, but I do feel like having that cushion for unexpected expenses really sort of relieves some of the pressure that's on you to hold on to things, because I think part of what we're fearing when we hold on to things out of security is that we won't have the money or means to replace those things. And so if you can just set a little bit of money aside every single paycheck, every single month, every single week, whenever you get paid, and you slowly see that amount grow, that way, when there is something that, you get rid of that maybe you do need down the line, you have the money for it in that account and you can just use it and it's covered and you don't have to worry about it. Okay, now moving on to sentimentality. If sentimentality is what is standing in your way and keeping you from decluttering, one of the things that I've found most helpful to me is remembering that I value the people in my life not for what they do for me or what they give me, but for who they are. And that's how I want to value the people in my life, and that's how I want other people to value me. And so when I am holding on to things that people have given me out of guilt or out of shame, or because I feel like I need to, what I am saying is that I value the things that people give me. And if I don't value those things, then I value them less. And that is against how I want to be as a person. And so reminding myself of that does make it easier to let go of those things. Another idea is that if something has a particular memory attached to it, but you don't really use it, you just use it as like a way to remember that thing, you could always take a picture of it and then declutter it, because having the picture might be as meaningful for you as holding the thing in your hand, because you're just really like looking at it and remembering, right? So a picture is a really, really good method for that. You can keep that online, or you can print it out even, and you can put it somewhere that is going to take up a lot less space than that physical thing in most cases. Another thing, and my husband does this really well, and I need to get on his level, but another idea that I think is really good is creating a memory box. And you can make your memory box like any size that you would like. It can be like a shoe box, it can be a little bit bigger, but just deciding on your memory box and then keeping only the mementos that fit in that memory box. And so if you have something that you want to add and the memory box is full, you go through and you find the things that you can get rid of to make room for that thing. And so you just always have a memory box that is the things that matter the most to you. And every once in a while, you go through it, you clean some things up, but you also have this wonderful experience of remembering all the good things in your life that you wanted to hold on to, which I think is beautiful. And now this next one is not for everyone, but I do find that sometimes it helps me to hold the thing in my hands and talk to it, to thank it for the role that it has played in my life and for the things that it reminds me of. And then once I've sort of, gotten that off my chest, talking to the thing, I then have a lot more closure and I feel able to part with it. Now, obviously, this isn't going to work if you're sitting there and you're doing it and the whole time you're thinking like, this is ridiculous, right? Like you have to actually like look at it and go, okay, I know that I'm talking to an inanimate object, but I am going to go through this process for myself. This is really for me, not for the object. And I'm going to be grateful for the role that this thing played in my life and the reasons that I don't want to get rid of it. And then once you sort of get all of that off your chest, you could write a poem, you could talk to it, you could do whatever, then it's often a lot easier to part with that thing because you have honored the reasons that you've held on to it for so long. And then finally, I will just say, as you're getting rid of things, remember that you don't have to get rid of every single thing that means something to you, right? Like, I think that getting rid of all the sentimental items in our life is really not a great way to make our spaces seem meaningful, right? Like, you want to have a few things that evoke memories and make you smile. But when it gets to be too many and the clutter gets to be too much, you want to be able to make choices about the most important things that you want to hold on to, right? Because that's really what life is. That is what simplicity is. That is what minimalism is making choices about the things that are most important to you and holding on to those. So you don't need to feel bad if you're holding on to something for sentimental reasons. That is totally fine. You just need to be able to put limits around it so that you're not overwhelmed by all of these things that you're trying to hold on to and juggle at the same time, right? Like there's more to life than just the past. There's the present, there's the future, but you do want to honor the past. And so I would say the number one thing as you're trying to get rid of sentimental items is don't feel shame for the fact that you want to keep these things. Just remember that you want to prioritize. You want to hold on to the most important things, and you want to be able to let the rest go. Okay, if practicality is what is holding you back, the first thing I recommend is that you go through and you set a time limit for how far out you want to keep things. Now, you could just do like a general rule for yourself. You could say, I don't want to keep things more than 6 months. I don't want to keep things more than a year. I don't want to keep things more than 3 months. Or you could kind of go through and you could say, okay, I'm going to make some rules based on categories, right? So like, for example, in my kitchen, I probably don't want to hold on to things that I'm not using for more than 3 months, more than 6 months. I make a lot of dishes, and so if I'm not using something in 3 months, that's probably a really good indication that I don't need it. But for things like my closet, I might go closer to a year because like maybe I bought something at the end of the season because I found it at a thrift store or something, and then I've just been sort of waiting. And so I don't want to get rid of things every 6 months because I haven't worn them, because I will potentially wear a lot of those things once the weather changes. So you can kind of make your own rules for yourself, kind of decide how granular you want that to be. Personally, I think that simple is better. So for me, I just sort of have a general rule of a year for everything. And then every once in a while, I'll think, well, a year seems a little too generous. And so I'll like bump that number down a little bit for a particular decluttering project. So once you have set like sort of a time limit on how long you can keep things for practical reasons, I think that another thing that can really help is setting a replacement budget. So for example, my rule for myself is that if I'm not sure if I should get rid of something, but I feel like, I'm not really using it, but I want to hold on to it for practical reasons, I am just going to get rid of it if it would cost less than $20 to replace. Because you know what? Most of the time I can afford $20 if I really, really had to have something that I'd gotten rid of. I think if I made more money, I might up that number. But for me, like $20 is like, that's it. If it's like 30, I'm probably just going to hold on to it for a little bit longer and see if I use it. So you get to decide what that amount is, but having a number is super, super helpful because you can just sort of look at something, you can go, oh yeah, this is useful, but I'm not using it. And how much would it cost to replace again? And then if it's cheap enough, you can just get rid of it. And then this last tip for practicality is not so much about getting rid of things, but it's more about curbing the number of things you bring in, which is also part of minimalism and makes your decluttering easier. And this tip is one that I've had to learn the hard way and that you may not like, but it is, I think, if you're holding on to things for practical reasons because you've got a good deal on them, whatever, check the sales less often. Because the thing that happens when you look at sales online or whatever is that you see something that could be useful and it's a good price, and so you buy it. And then you may or may not use that thing. You may be holding on to way more things that you have. And most of the time, the sales aren't actually so good that you are saving much money. It's actually like, you're maybe saving a few dollars, but you're having all of this clutter in your house. And so if you're holding on to things for practical reasons, and that's really keeping you from decluttering, I would just say, I know we're heading into the holiday season. I know that stores do their best all year round to entice you with sales, but I really think you're going to be better off from a clutter perspective and probably from a money perspective too, if you just don't check the sales. You don't buy the things that you don't need. And then if you do need something and you go on and you're shopping around to see what the price is and something happens to be on sale, great, take advantage of that sale. But don't go looking to see what's on sale and what deals you can pick up, because that's how you end up with a lot of extra practical things that don't actually serve you, that you're not actually using, that you don't actually need in your house. Moving on to overwhelm and exhaustion. And if this is what is holding you back, there's one thing I really, really want to make clear, and it's that overwhelm and exhaustion keeping you from decluttering is okay. Clutter is morally neutral, and that's actually an idea that I picked up from a book called How to Keep House While Drowning by Casey Davis, and it is just a fantastic little book. And one of the things that she talks about a lot in that book is the idea that clutter is morally neutral. We have sort of picked up this idea that clutter is morally bad, and that if our houses are cluttered, then that reflects poorly on us. But the thing is, clutter is not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. It's just like it's neutral. And so if you want a less cluttered space, that is fine, but you don't need to feel shame about the fact that you don't have that right now. I don't have this channel because I think that, clutter is bad. I have this channel because I want to live a more simplified life. And I thankfully have the kind of life where I can do that. I have time to declutter. I have energy to declutter, but that's not always the case for me. And it's not always going to be the case for you, and that's okay. And that's really the main thing that I want you to hear. There's not really a lot that you need to do about this. And I actually think that the more that you try to force yourself to declutter and just really embrace minimalism while you are overwhelmed and exhausted is actually going to backfire and make that harder for you. I think it's much better to give yourself grace and to do what you can, even if that doesn't seem like it's much, or even if that is nothing, and just slowly allow yourself to not be overwhelmed and exhausted by the decluttering. Okay, so that being said, I'm not going to leave you there because sometimes I do feel like the clutter in our houses contributes to our sense of overwhelm and exhaustion. And so if that's the case for you and you want to be able to start making some progress on it, here's what I recommend. First of all, have like a small bag or a trash bag or a paper bag, something, take it out, and then once per day, get rid of one thing. Put that in there. That's going to go to donation or the trash or whatever you decide. Once per day, put one thing in there. If you feel like doing more than one thing, that's okay, but your goal is once per day, and that's it. The point here with this exercise is not to get rid of a ton of stuff. Like obviously, if you put one thing in and you go, oh, I see a second thing, put the second thing in, you can do as many things as you want, but make your goal for yourself super low, super achievable, because you want to be able to make progress so that when you think about decluttering, you don't feel overwhelmed and exhausted. You think, I can do this. You're just like, oh, okay, yep, I threw something away. I decluttered something. That's just sort of what I do. I do this every day. And eventually, it will make a difference. Eventually, you will not feel overwhelmed and exhausted, and you'll be able to do a few more things, and you'll see a difference in your space. But the main thing there is just like teaching yourself to be gentle with yourself, to not beat yourself up for doing little, and to actually know that like that is the goal. Like the goal is to just do a little bit and to be okay with that. The second thing that I would say is if you really, really need to see like progress, like if that is your goal, if you're like, I just want that nice like before after like feeling, then I would say pick one project, maybe like one area in your house to get rid of. And when I say area, I mean like one bookshelf or one like, part of a room. Just like pick one thing to do your decluttering with, because you don't want to do a big project. You want to do something that is achievable, where you can see that progress and where that will encourage you instead of just discouraging you further in your decluttering pursuits. So do one small thing. Do not allow yourself to get distracted by other parts of the house. Pick one thing that can be, the most impactful thing for you. It could be the easiest thing for you. I don't care. Start with whatever feels right for you. Do that, work on that a little bit day after day after day, and only work on that thing. If you have to take something to the other room and you go, oh, wow, this room's a mess too, ignore it. That is a project for another day. Work on the thing that you set out to work on, and then celebrate along the way as you see milestones. Like take a before picture, take progress pictures, take an after picture so that you can go back and you can look at those and you can say, wow, look at the progress that I've made. Look at how my hard work paid off. And so you feel excited about it. You feel a little bit less overwhelmed and exhausted, and you're going like, okay, I can see the progress that I'm making. And I do see that I'm making a difference. And then finally, I would just say that as you are working through this overwhelm and exhaustion and you're trying to declutter, just remember that typical decluttering schedules and advice are probably not going to work for you in this season of your life. This doesn't mean they've never worked for you. This doesn't mean they won't work for you in the future. It just means that right now, that is probably not what you need. Right now, You need to be able to focus on being gentle with yourself and kind to yourself. And the decluttering thing is just sort of like secondary. So don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to follow a certain schedule or a certain routine or a certain set of rules. Give yourself grace to not do those things right now. And then when you start to feel less overwhelmed and exhausted at the thought of decluttering, that's when you can start doing that research again and sort of looking at routines or schedules or ideas that get you excited to declutter some more. Okay, our next one is perfectionism. And if you are feeling overwhelmed by the amount of decluttering you have to do, you may want to pay attention to this one too, because a lot of times we can get really perfectionistic about decluttering, and that creates unnecessary overwhelm. So here's how to make it easier on yourself to declutter if you suspect or know that you are being perfectionistic about it. The first thing is deliberately practice not doing perfect decluttering. So what I mean by this is, say you are decluttering a room. Deliberately stop before you think you're done. Like get rid of a few things, then stop. You're done for the day, and stand back and appreciate your progress. I think that one of the keys to defeating perfectionism in decluttering is that we need to develop an appreciation for the progress that we're making, because if we have this sort of like idealized version of our spaces in our head that, maybe have, new paint and new furniture and new all of this, like you have this idealized perfect version, and that is so hard to get to. It makes our projects so much more difficult. But if we can appreciate the fact that like, wow, we picked up some things and now the room looks better, that gives perfectionism a blow. And that means that it's easier to declutter the next time that you want to. Another way to do this, instead of like doing it while you're decluttering, is to intentionally leave some things out from time to time, because your house doesn't need to look like a magazine all of the time, right? Like if you leave a few things here and there, you can remind yourself like, hey, I live here. It's okay that I use my space. It's okay that my things are out and about. And it's okay. Yes, it may look a little bit cluttered, but I am teaching myself to be less perfectionistic about that right now. Another way to celebrate your progress, I actually recommended it in the overwhelm and exhaustion thing too, is to take before and after pictures or before and progress pictures, so that you can really like look at your things and go, wow, like actually this is amazing. My progress was great, and celebrate that. Anything you can do to celebrate the progress that you're making is going to help you be less perfectionistic about it, because you'll have an appreciation for the work that you've already done and the space that you've already created. And then finally, I will say that I think setting realistic goals before you start decluttering is very helpful for battling perfectionism. So for example, maybe my kitchen is a little bit messy and I want to do a declutter, and I'll say, okay, if I declutter my kitchen counters so that I have more space when I cook, because that has been sketchy lately, that's going to be a win for me, right? It forces me to think about, how am I actually going to use this space? What's the functionality of this space? And I'm not thinking so much about aesthetics, because if you start thinking about aesthetics, what you want the room to look like when you're done, perfectionism is going to kick in, because you want it to look great. Like you have this grand vision of how your house is going to look in your head. I mean, I know I do, and I think that most of us do. But if you think about like, how do I want to actually use this space instead of what do I want it to look like, that really helps keep perfectionism in check, because how you're going to use it is much more functional, much more practical, and there's really less space for perfectionism to come in. Okay, the next thing on my list is holding on to past versions of ourselves. And there's really only two ways to work with this and make this easier when it comes to decluttering. And that is, first of all, being crystal clear about who we want to be. And then second of all, accepting ourselves for who we are now. Now, those things kind of grate against each other a little bit, so let me explain. First, I find that it is super helpful to define what matters most to me in this season of my life. So I think that this is where a lot of us get this wrong, is that we just sort of think about our life in general and we think about the things that are most important to us, but it really is, like this quarter or this season or whatever, like what is most important to us right now. And there are tools that you can use to do this. I talked about Value Sort Cutter app in one of my super, super early rough videos, but I'll link to the app and not the video in the description. But really, you don't even need an app. You can just sort of sit down with a piece of paper or your phone and you can write out, 3 to 5 to 7, I guess, things that are most important to you in your life right now. These could be values, these could be activities, ways of spending your time, whatever. Just write those down. And those are the things that are most important to you right now. And if you know those things, if you know the type of person you want to be in this season for your life, the things that you want to show up for, the things that are not as important to you right now, that makes it a little bit easier to sort of view your stuff more realistically because yes, like it might be important to you to be like super creative through all of your hobbies, but maybe right now you're only focusing on one of them because you have, 4 other things that are really important to you that you need to spend time on. And that's okay. Like it's okay to have to put things aside for a while. It's okay to declutter things and then come back to them later in our lives when we do have more time or they are more important to us. The second thing, and this one is the much harder thing, is to work on accepting ourselves for who we are right now, flaws and all. And I know that that is not fun, but one of the beauties of decluttering and of this process is accepting the fact that we are human, we have limits, and that we don't have time to do all the things that we want to do. And so really what our lives can become, if we're intentional about them, and minimalism really helps us bring this intentionality to the forefront, is our lives become curated by us. We have all of these lists of possibilities in front of us, and we get to curate and decide on the ones that we love most. And so if there's a mismatch between how we are spending our time in this season and the things that we own, then we probably need to shed some of those things that we own to make room for who we are right now. And I think that's really beautiful. I think it can be this very intentional process of curating what's important to us and really prioritizing that with our money, with our time, with our spaces. And then, also leaving room for us to change, because obviously we're humans. We want to grow. We want to move forward in our lives. We don't want to get bored or stuck in a rut, but just embracing fully who we are now, making space for that, and accepting the fact that some of what we are in the past, there isn't space for that right now, and moving forward. And then the final thing is holding on to idealized versions of ourselves. And honestly, the way that you deal with this is similar to the way that you would deal with holding on to a past version of yourself, right? Like you need to be crystal clear about who you are, what's important to you in this season, and you need to be able to accept that. You need to be able to accept who you are right now and be okay with that. And I'm not saying that you can't strive for more. I'm not saying that you can't try to improve yourself. Please do not hear that, because I would never say that. But I think we all have things that we have held on to for too long and that are weighing us down because they are attached to some sort of dream or vision of our future that we just do not have the energy or time or expertise to pursue right now. It might be that you have a bunch of clothes in your closet that you've bought for when you lose weight, or it might be that you have a bunch of supplies for a hobby that you have never started up. And it is okay to get rid of those things. If that turns out that that was the right dream for you, it's okay. You can get things for that dream when you make it happen, right? But you also need to have space for who you are right now. You need your space to be usable. You need to not have too many things. And so if you can, out of love and self-acceptance, get rid of some of those things that are attached to idealized versions of yourselves, the mental clutter that's taking up when you see those things. The truth is that we're often unrealistic in our expectations of ourselves. We think that we have more time than we do to do the things that would make changes. We think we have more motivation, and it's okay. If you've been unrealistic with yourself, it is okay to let some of those things go and create more space in your life and less mental worry and anxiety about when you're going to fit those things in. Now, I will say, if you're decluttering and you come across some things and you're like, man, I really wish that I used this. This seems like it would be so cool. I forgot that I had it. Or I really want to step into sort of this idea, this dream that I had for myself. And then what I would say is be selective about it. You can't do it with everything, probably, if you're like me anyway. You probably can't do it with everything, but be selective about it and pick a few of those objects that represent the goal that you have. So maybe you want to get fit and you have a bunch of exercise equipment that you're not using. Pick, maybe a weight or something and put it somewhere you will see it every day. I don't care if it messes with your minimalist vibe or your aesthetic. Like, I don't care. Put it somewhere you will see it every day so that you will use it. You will start creating that habit and that positive change that you've dreamed about. And if you do that and you find that you still don't do it, it's probably time to get rid of that thing. But if you do that and you start developing a positive habit, then congrats, you started to step toward that idealized version of yourself. So I think just the two main things here that you need to remember if you're holding on to idealized versions of yourself and that is weighing you down is, first of all, it's okay to accept who you are right now. And second of all, if there is some change that you want to make, as the more that you think about it and the more that you look at these things, then hold on to a little bit, give yourself a time frame, make it super obvious and super easy for you to access those things and to do whatever you need to do with them. And then reassess in, like maybe 3 months or something, whether or not you're actually going to use these things and make that change in your life right now. Because that's the thing, is like, you are not saying goodbye to these dreams forever. You are saying goodbye to them for now. And sometimes we need to do that. And that's okay. And then when you are ready to pursue that dream again, you can buy the stuff again. So I hope that video has helped you. I know that all of those things have been struggles for me at different times in my decluttering journey. And so I'd love to hear what you have to say, or what helped you, or what thing that you struggle with the most. If you're not sure which thing is blocking you from decluttering, I recommend watching this video because I explained each thing more in depth there. But anyway, in the meantime, I hope that this helps you make your space more the way that you want it to be, imbues simplicity in your life, and helps you to have a little bit of a better day. Bye.